Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Through the first 6 articles, we will cover 7 chapters of economic survey in detail. The topics will include the broad state of economy, deregulation, climate and environment, agriculture, the financial sector, and the impact of artificial intelligence on labor. It will be important for your prelims and mains preparation. Now, today's discussion will contain lots of data. I have filtered out only that much data from the economic survey, which you will be using in forming arguments while writing answers. So the first article is related to the broad state of India's economy. As per the economic survey, the macroeconomic fundamentals of the Indian economy are robust and it is poised to grow. It has estimated that for the fiscal year 2025, the real GDP growth rate will be about 6.4%, and it has projected the growth rate for the fiscal year 2026 to be between 6.3% to 6.8%. So we will have a look at the macroeconomic indicators of the Indian economy and also the global scenario. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy. Now, before coming to the Indian economic performance, let's have a look at the global scenario also. Globally, the global GDP growth rate has been steady, but it has been uneven. For the fiscal year 2023, the global GDP grew by 3.3%. For the fiscal year 2024, it is about 3.2%, and it is projected to grow at 3.3% for the fiscal year 2025. But this growth rate has been uneven. There are regional variations. For example, when we look at the advanced economies, the growth rates there are slightly improving. Why is it important for us? Because when the growth rates in the advanced economies are higher, then the foreign investors, why would they invest in India? They will be getting better returns in their home countries in the advanced economies, which are treated to be more stable. Therefore, it might even lead to an FDI exodus, which was also witnessed in the last quarter. It was one of the reasons behind the stock market corrections in the last quarter. The other reason being that the rupee did not fare well against the US dollar. Therefore, the US growth rate, it has been stable. It is about 2.8% in 2024. Even the euro area is also improving. It grew at 0.8% in 2024 and it is projected to grow at 1% in 2025. Whereas when we look at the emerging markets, the performance has been mixed. For example, China has faced issues. It has faced issues in terms of consumption. The consumption has been sluggish there. When the consumption falls, then the demand falls. It leads to the lack of demand for the products. The production falls, which further hampers the economic growth. Likewise, it has faced challenges for its real estate sector also. There was immense boom in the real estate sector in China. It led to the overproduction of the housing units which are lying vacant. And when it goes bust, when the bubble bursts, it leads to the decline in economic growth. Likewise, the manufacturing sector globally, it is showing signs of slowdown. The global manufacturing PMI, it has stagnated and almost contracted. The supply chain disruptions also are a factor in the manufacturing sector slowdown, which is observed even in the European region as well, and there is weak demand as well. One of the reasons being the poorer wage rate growths. The service sector, on the other hand, they have showed resilience. Globally, the services PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, has expanded, and therefore the service sector has grown despite facing inflation in the services. And when we look at the inflation trends, the inflation has eased globally because of the tightening monetary policies across the board. But the services sector inflation persists. And there are risks also, the risks of synchronized price increases. And this may happen due to the geopolitical tensions and even due to the supply chain disruptions, etc. Now, what are the risks globally, the geopolitical risks and the trade risks? One, there is a risk in the form of geopolitical tensions. We have witnessed the conflicts in the Ukraine and in the Middle East region. The conflict in Ukraine will lead to disruptions in the food supply because Ukraine is an exporter of wheat. Likewise, the disruptions in Middle East will lead to the disruptions in the energy supply because it supplies oil and natural gas. Likewise, there are trade policy uncertainties which will lead to increased volatility. The shipping has also been disrupted due to the issues in Red Sea as well as the Panama Canal. The freight rates are higher, the delivery times are higher. When the freight rates increase, it leads to increased import cost for India also, which leads to the current account deficit. And the inflation risk still persists. The services inflation still is high, and there are potentials for the commodity price shocks as well, which will again lead to inflation. There are domestic risks as well. The domestic risks are induced due to the weak global demand, falling exports in the merchandise, and supply chain disruptions. Now, let's have a look at India's economic performance also. When we look at the GDP growth rate, the economic survey has estimated that the real GDP growth rate for fiscal year 2025 will be about 6.4%, whereas the projection for fiscal year 2026 is between 6.3% to 6.8%. Now, what is driving this growth? Essentially, the two sectors, agriculture and services, because manufacturing is facing challenges. How is agriculture performing? When we compare the gross value added in the agriculture sector, it is more than the pre-pandemic trend line. The dotted line represents the trend which should have been there as per the pre-pandemic trends, whereas the agriculture GVA is above this trend line. Now, this is because of a record Kharif production and favorable monsoon conditions, which has led to the increase in the production. When we look at manufacturing sector, it is facing challenges because of essentially weak demand and seasonal factors also. Because we can observe that the trend line for the manufacturing GVA is below the pre-pandemic trend line. But when we look at construction within manufacturing, it is showing good growth rate. The GVA in construction is improving, and we can confirm the same when we look at the mushrooming of the high rises. When we look at the service sector, it has performed well, especially the financial services, real estate, and the professional services. The private consumption in India has been stable, and the rural demand has been improving, which will fuel growth. The fiscal discipline which is shown by the union government is also commended by the economic survey, because the capital expenditure as a percentage of the total expenditure that is undertaken by the union government, it has been improving continuously. It was about 12% in fiscal year 2021, and in fiscal year 2024 it has improved to 21%. When we look at macroeconomic stability, again the fundamentals are strong. The current account deficit, it is manageable. The CAD is about 1.2% only, and in the services there is a trade surplus. We can have a look at the current account deficit through this graph also, that the current account deficit has been within the manageable levels in the past several quarters. Now, if you observe the inflation trends, inflation in India is also subdued. The retail inflation, as per the economic survey, is projected to be 4.9% for the fiscal year 2025. If we see the core inflation, it has been coming down. We can observe the green line. But the food inflation remains high. It remains elevated chiefly due to the supply chain disruptions and the weather vagaries, because agriculture in India is monsoon dependent. And therefore, the consumer FPI has increased from 7.5% in fiscal year 2024 to 8.4% in fiscal year 2025. But still, the overall CPI inflation remains within the comfortable band. It remains less than 6%. When we look at the external sector, we have a trade deficit in the merchandise. We can observe through this yellow column that we have a merchandise trade deficit which has been widening through the past 3 quarters. But the service trade remains in the surplus, and it gives us a cushion. And there are remittances also, the net private transfers, which lead to the lowering of the current account deficit. And therefore, the forex reserves in India are also significant. The forex reserves are about 630 billion US dollars, which are enough to cover the imports for over 10 months and also cover 90% of our external debt as well, indicating macroeconomic stability. If you observe the banking sector, it has shown overall stability. The same is indicated by the banking sector indicators. For example, the gross non-performing assets, they have been declining. They have come down to 2.6% of the gross loans. Also, we can see a strong capital buffer, that is the capital to risk weighted assets ratio is at about 6.7%. Also, the profit after taxes, it has increased 22% year on year. The return on equity for the banking sector, again, it is good. But the credit growth, that has rather moderated. We can observe through this graph that the credit growth, it is rather stagnant. Why credit growth is required? Because when people will borrow, they will invest it, they will manufacture, the production will increase, it will create employment also, it will improve the manufacturing sector growth also and indicate overall economic growth. The employment trends in India, as per the economic survey, have been positive. The unemployment rate, the economic survey claims that it has declined to 3.2% in 2023-2024, which can be observed through this graph also. The economic survey says that there has been an increasing formalization as well. We can observe this through the net EPFO subscriptions. The EPFO subscriptions have increased from 61 lakh in fiscal year 19 to 131 lakhs in fiscal year 2024. At the same time, the survey says that the age of artificial intelligence is coming. It will improve the productivity, it will create further jobs, but those jobs will be high skill jobs. Therefore, we need to upskill and reskill our workforce to ensure that they do not lose their jobs, and it leads to further improvement in productivity as well as employment generation. Now, what are the growth drivers for the Indian economy as per the survey? It indicates that the rural demand will increase growth, because rural demand will lead to the increase in the private consumption and it will lead to a consumption-led growth. Plus, the easing food inflation will also ensure growth, which is expected, and the stable macroeconomic conditions will also contribute to growth, because the macroeconomic fundamentals for the Indian economy, as we observe, are robust. We also need to increase the private investment and increase the corporate wages as well, because the increase in corporate wages will again lead to the increase in the consumption-led growth. But there are certain challenges. Those challenges are related to the structural reforms and deregulation. The survey also recommends making policy recommendations regarding the structural reforms, that they should be taken up at the grassroots level. They will increase the competitiveness of the businesses and they will sustain that growth in the medium term. Also, deregulation will ensure the ease of doing business. The ease of doing business will attract investment and boost the economic activity. And we also need to go for the skill development, including the prioritization of education and the training to prepare for the artificial intelligence. Now, there is a means practice question as well. India's economic growth is increasingly influenced by global risks such as geopolitical tensions, trade policy uncertainties, and financial volatility. Discuss the global risks to India's economic growth and analyze the key sectoral trends shaping its economic development. Please try to write it. Now, the next article again is related to the economic survey, focusing upon deregulation, because the economic survey bats for deregulation. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy. Now, before coming to deregulation, let's have a look at the global context behind it. The economic survey argues that the world economy is going for a geo-economic fragmentation. The geo-economic fragmentation is the reverse of a global economic integration. It defines it as a policy-driven reversal of the global economic integration. Now, this will affect trade, because the countries, because of the economic fragmentation, will impose barriers, trade barriers. They will impose tariff and non-tariff barriers. They will go for protectionist measures. It will affect the flow of the capital. It will affect the flow of the professionals, affecting the migration flows. For example, the USA is tightening the H-1B visa rules. Now, this will lead to a loss in the global GDP. The global GDP will suffer a loss of about 0.2% to 0.7% as per the survey. And the potential losses will be even higher at about 8 to 12% if the technological decoupling is also considered. The technological decoupling essentially means that the countries who have access to advanced technologies, better research, they are not willing to share the technology with the other countries who will be working inefficiently. This will lead to the loss of global GDP. For example, USA imposing export controls on the chips export to China. Likewise, the FDI shifts also will be impacted because of the geoeconomic fragmentation. The FDIs, they will be moving among the geopolitically aligned countries. The investors will be wary of investing in other countries with which it does not have good relations. They will be wary of being sanctioned, and the emerging markets are the natural losers. When we look at the geoeconomic fragmentation, China will emerge as the dominant player in the global supply chains. The survey observes that China is quickly emerging as a manufacturing powerhouse. When we look at the global manufacturing, as projected by 2030, 45% of the global manufacturing will be done in China. Now, this is one of the rare events after the dominance of UK during the times of Industrial Revolution and the dominance of USA after World War II, when such a dominance of a single player in the manufacturing is emerging. And it will be controlling the electric vehicles, critical minerals, and also clean energy equipment. When we look at energy transition, again, China controls about 80% of solar photovoltaic manufacturing. Therefore, it will be controlling the renewable energy production also, and 60% of the wind energy capacity as well is installed in China. And there will be dependency risks because the major critical minerals, they are mined in China, including lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. And if China imposes export bans, it will lead to supply chain disruptions in the critical minerals. And the implications for India will be severe because India will be dependent upon China for the imports of the electric vehicles components as well as the equipment needed for the production of the renewable energy. So why do we need deregulation? Because we need to achieve 8% of annual growth for the next decade to ensure that we achieve our goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047. And IMF has projected that we are poised to become a $5 trillion economy by fiscal year 2028. And by fiscal year 30, we will be about $6.3 trillion economy. So it indicates about 10.2% of nominal growth rate annually. Therefore, we need to leverage the domestic growth also, and which will come through deregulation and ensuring economic freedom. Now, coming to deregulation, the survey says that it will serve as a catalyst for growth. Because when we give the economic freedom to the individuals as well as the businesses, they will be able to invest freely. It will lead to economic growth. And the MSMEs will also grow because they are having a burden of compliance. And when the compliance costs are high, it hinders the growth of the MSMEs. When there is deregulation, this compliance burden will go away. And the survey even gives the examples of deregulation also. For example, going for the improvements in forest regulations, like allowing someone access to their own land. And the labor laws need improvement. For example, the states of Haryana and Tamil Nadu, they amended the building and labor regulations. It led to the growth of MSMEs there. The survey says that the deregulation has to be systematic. It proposes a 3-step process. First, we can identify the areas for deregulation, that these are the sectors or areas in which deregulation is needed. For example, land, labor, building standards, etc. Then we can compare the regulations in one state with other states or with other countries also, so that we can learn the lessons from the global experiences, and then we can estimate the costs of regulation on the businesses and try to bring that down. The key areas of deregulation that the survey suggests specifically include the labor laws. For example, it suggests that we can put in place flexible working hours. We can give an overtime pay to encourage job creation. Likewise, we can remove the prohibitions on women from working in night shifts in the factories. Likewise, regarding building standards, the survey gives specific suggestions that we can rationalize the parking norms, which will reduce the land loss, and it will also be utilized as it is an important and costly asset. And we can increase the validity of the fire NOCs, no objection certificates, for the low risk buildings. Likewise, the electricity tariffs for the corporates, it needs to be brought down for the factories to improve their competitiveness. And regarding the regulation, we can go for a risk-based regulation. The high risk category enterprises, they can be regulated highly. The low risk category enterprises, they can be deregulated. For example, we can observe the private parties, their involvement in the building approvals and inspections will lead to deregulation, and also we can adopt PPP models for the enforcement of the regulation as well. Now, the survey also gives a list of areas of regulation and the provisions which are affecting businesses. For example, when we look at the building and construction, there is the town and country planning department, there is the bylaws, there are the fire safety laws, and in each of these areas of regulation, the state issues mandates. There are permits which are to be obtained from the state. There are quality, quantity controls, fees and taxes, compliances, inspections, and each activity increases the cost, time, and the uncertainty of starting and operating a business. And this discourages the investors and the growth of MSMEs as well. Now, we can learn the lessons from the experiences of other countries also regarding deregulation. For example, USA has set up an Office of Management and Budget. This office evaluates the cost effectiveness of a regulation. If it is very costly for the businesses to comply or for the government also to enforce, then it is done away with. Likewise, UK has adopted a principle of 1 in 2 out. That is, whenever a new regulatory compliance is put in place for the businesses, if it is imposing £1 burden upon them, then £2 burden is removed from them by doing away with the existing regulatory provisions. Likewise, in New Zealand, the Ministry of Regulation is put in place. This ministry streamlines the laws and reduces the compliance costs by rationalizing them. Now, what is the paradigm for the medium-term growth? The survey suggests that we should focus on the Mittelstand. The term Mittelstand is used for the small and medium enterprises. It is the heart of the German economy from where the term is borrowed. We should strengthen the small and medium enterprises sector to drive innovation, employment, and exports. We should also go for an employment-sensitive growth. This will happen because of deregulation. Because deregulation can create labor-intensive growth. More jobs will be created as the companies do not need to comply with more and more labor laws, and we need to balance the capital and labor needs as well. It will lead to a butterfly effect. The deregulation, it will trigger the entrepreneurship because they don't have to comply with too many regulations, too many laws, too many norms, and it will trigger further the investment as well as innovation. Now, what are the recommendations regarding deregulation by the survey? It says that we should liberalize the standards. We should reduce the unnecessary controls upon the businesses, free them. And we should streamline the compliance mechanisms. The processes need to be simplified. They need to be digitized so that in one click or in a single window, they are able to put in their compliances. And we need to adopt a risk-based regulation. And the regulations, they can be tailor-made to the risk profile of the businesses. Higher the risk of the business, higher the regulation from the side of the government. We can reduce the tariffs and fees, which will improve the competitiveness of the businesses and further again increase entrepreneurship, investment. And they will serve as the internal engines of growth, because in a fragmented global economy, again, we need to push our domestic businesses. There is a mains practice question also. Deregulation is considered a catalyst for economic growth by enhancing competition and efficiency. Discuss the potential benefits of deregulation for India's growth. Suggest key areas where deregulation could be implemented and draw lessons from global experiences on its effectiveness. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to the climate and environment chapter of economic survey, because the economic survey has specifically suggested that India should not shut down its coal plants. This is important in GS3 under the topic conservation, environmental pollution and degradation. Now, the survey suggests that India faces certain challenges due to climate change. One challenge is regarding the energy transition. We want to transition from the production of energy using fossil fuels towards the production of energy from the renewable sources. But we lack the storage technology. We do not have the access to critical minerals. The critical minerals are required for the production of the equipments which are used in the generation of the renewable energy, for example, the photovoltaic cells. But still, the ratio of the renewable energy in the total energy mix in India has been increasing. The solar energy accounts for 20% of the total energy production, wind energy accounts for 10%, and the overall renewable energy accounts for more than 40% of India's total energy production. Also, India is particularly vulnerable to climate change. As per the survey, India is the 7th most vulnerable country in the world due to the events like extreme weather events, the rise in the sea level, the insecurity of water, etc. Plus, the international countries, they are falling short of their commitments. They gave the commitments in terms of the nationally determined contributions as per the Paris goals, but they have not been fulfilling it. The funds that they are giving, most of those funds are for the mitigation purposes rather than the adaptation purposes. We can observe that the blue columns, they are for mitigation and the gray columns are for adaptation. But we need adaptation expenditure. The adaptation expenditure in India has been increasing. When we look at the situation from fiscal year 2016 to 2022, the adaptation expenditure in India has increased from 3.7% to 5.6% of GDP. Now, when we discuss energy transition specifically, there are several issues highlighted by this survey. For example, historically, the developed countries, they were using the maximum amount of coal to generate energy. It was part of the fossil fuels. What the developed countries did was, they transitioned from coal, they left coal, but they did not transition to renewable energy sources. They transitioned to rather gas. For example, we can observe the case of USA. In USA, 36% of the energy was being produced through the usage of coal in 1992. It has come down to 6%, but simultaneously, there has been an increase in the use of gas as well as oil in the USA for the energy production. So this highlights that the developing countries, they are transitioning rather towards the renewable energy, but the developed countries, they have transitioned towards other sources of fossil fuel use. So they have not reduced emissions, they have just reduced the amount of coal used in the production of electricity there. Whereas the India's energy needs will be keeping on growing because of the rising population, and we need coal. We will be advancing our renewable energy production also, but we can't leave coal, because as per the survey, there was a large expansion in the coal power plants which took place in 2010s. And now there is no economic sense, there is no economic rationale to just shut down our coal plants. They have life for another couple of decades at least. Now there are certain challenges also in the renewable energy that India is facing. For example, there are the grid integration issues, because it is intermittent energy production and it will lead to the overloading of grid and the land availability as well. For example, the land needed for the production of solar energy, wind energy, etc. Plus, when we look at the nuclear energy, it serves as a potential alternative. But there are concerns regarding this also. For example, the public safety concerns, the protests that were done in Tamil Nadu, for example, and the supply chain challenges as well. Because again, the nuclear energy, for the production of it, we will have to import uranium. Now coming to the progress of renewable energy in India, but nevertheless, India has made giant strides in the renewable energy production. The share of renewable energy in its total energy mix has been increasing continuously since the past decade. In terms of the installed capacity, 46% of India's electricity generation capacity is through the non-fossil fuels, which include the use of solar, wind, hydro, as well as nuclear power. To promote solar power specifically, we have the scheme PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. Under this scheme, we have the aim to install the rooftop solar projects in 1 crore households. To promote the offshore wind energy generation, there is the Viability Gap Funding Scheme. To promote bioenergy production, we have the National Bioenergy Program. It promotes the waste to energy, biomass and biogas projects as well. The RBI came up with the green deposit scheme. The green bonds, the sovereign green bonds are also issued, whereby the money is collected to ensure the investment in the green projects. Regarding sustainability in general, we have the LIFE mission, that is Lifestyle for Environment. It is a global movement which is also endorsed by the United Nations Environment Assembly, and it leads to the behavioral change as it promotes the reduction in the food waste, the promotion of the plant-based diets, the adoption of the energy efficient practices. There are urban initiatives which are promoted under it, for example, going for vertical gardens, waste management, and the expansion of the public transport, which will ultimately lead to reduction in emissions. Likewise, we are promoting the circular economy as well as the resource efficiency. The circular economy is promoted through the control of the waste management. For that, we have the extended producer responsibility framework for the recycling of waste. To eliminate plastic pollution, we have banned the single-use plastics, and anyway, the per capita plastic consumption in India is quite low. There are adaptation measures also that India has put in place, including a national adaptation plan, which is under development to align it with the sustainable development goals. In the agriculture sector, we are promoting the climate resilient seeds, the groundwater preservation, encouraging the adoption of those crops which are not groundwater guzzling, and promotion of the soil health, modifying the cropping practices so that agriculture is sustainable. We are promoting urban resilience through the National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, Amrut Mission to address the urban flooding, heat stress, water management, etc. In the coastal regions, we are promoting mangrove conservation, sea walls, beach nourishment to combat the sea level rise. And for water management in general, there is the Jal Shakti Abhiyan for the rainwater harvesting. The water body mapping is being done and afforestation promoted to ensure that we are adapting to climate change also. Now, the next article is again related to the economic survey focusing upon agriculture. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy. Now, first let's have a look at some data. Agriculture sector forms the backbone of India's economy. It contributes 16% to India's GDP as per the data of fiscal year 2024, and it employs 46% of India's population. It is resilient as it has shown 5% growth annually from fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2023, and there has been a recovery in fiscal year 2025. We can observe this especially. Now, what are the drivers which are driving the growth in the agriculture sector? One, there are the government initiatives. The government is coming up with initiatives to assure remunerative prices to improve the institutional credit access. We can observe from this graph that the institutional credit for the farmers in India has been increasing. That is the credit from the side of banks, whereas the non-institutional credit has been decreasing. For example, the credit from the money lenders, non-institutional creditors, etc. Plus, the crop diversification and sustainable practices, they have been ensuring that the productivity in agriculture is sustained. The monsoon is also one of the drivers behind the agriculture growth, as the Kharif food grain production in 2024 is up by 5% as compared to the previous year. The agriculture income growth also has been growing. It has grown 5% annually over the past decade. Now, within agriculture, the economic survey suggests that the floriculture can serve as a sunrise industry, because the floriculture, it is 100% export oriented and it is significantly profitable also. It gives higher returns and it can be done on small land holdings also. The data itself proves the same, that 90% of floriculture in India is done upon the marginal land holdings. Plus, it has shown significant export growth. In fiscal year 2024, it led to the export earnings of more than 700 crore rupees. Likewise, in the allied sectors, the livestock growth has been promising. It contributed 30% to the gross value added in agriculture in fiscal year 2023. The fisheries sector have been expanding. The compounded annual growth rate in the fisheries sector from fiscal year 2015 to 2023 has been 13.6%. The seafood exports have been growing by 29% from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 2024. But there are certain challenges that the agriculture sector faces. For example, there are the weather vagaries. Due to climate change, the agriculture faces a risk. But there is a green shoot that there are diversified income streams. For example, the income coming from animal husbandry, fisheries, etc., which makes the sector relatively resilient. There are regional variations also. For example, the states of Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, they lead in the growth in the agriculture sector. There are productivity gaps also. The crop yields in the agriculture in India, they are lower than the global averages in the crop yields. Plus, there has been a slower growth in the production of the oil seeds. and it is mainly due to the heavy reliance upon the imports and the heavy production of the cereals in India. There is a future potential also. The survey suggests that there is untapped growth opportunities in pulses, edible oils, and the high value crops, which will make agriculture remunerative, reduce the imports of the oil seeds also. Plus, we can go for the market driven price signals to ensure that the price discovery is proper, and we can go for risk hedging mechanisms also and promote sustainable practices to boost productivity. Now coming to the article also mentions that the irrigation coverage in India has increased from 49% to 55% from 2015-16 to 2020-2021. And the irrigation intensity has also risen from 144% to 154%. But there is a need to improve irrigation in some states like Jharkhand and Assam, where the irrigation coverage is less than 20%. The recommendations for agriculture include the promotion of the research and development to align the agriculture practices with the agroclimatic conditions. That is, there should be agroclimatic zonations, and the crop rotations and the crop production should be as per the agroclimatic zones. We can adapt the production patterns to the natural resource availability as well. Now, the next article is related to the financial sector in the economic survey, because the economic survey has suggested that excessive financialization can also hurt the Indian economy. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy. First, let's have a look at the broad parameters in the financial sector. The bank credit growth, it has been steady, it has converged with the deposit growth. The profitability of the scheduled commercial banks has also been significant because of the declining gross NPAs, which have hit 2.6% as of September 2024. That is at a 12-year low. Likewise, the capital to risk weighted assets ratio has also been significant. When we look at the financial inclusion, it has also been increasing. The RBI's financial inclusion index has risen from 53.9 in 2021 to 64 in 2024. The rural financial institutions, they have been one of the key drivers of the financial inclusion. For example, the regional rural banks, they have increased to 43 in number, plus their asset quality has also improved. There is a role of the development financial institutions, that is the DFIs, in the infrastructure financing. For example, NABFID. The capital markets have also been strong. There has been increase in capital formation, wealth creation. For example, the stock markets in India in the past year, they have hit all-time highs. The insurance and pension sectors have also been significant. Their progress has been towards the universal coverage, that is increasing in penetration. Let's look at insurance sector specifically. As per the survey, it has been growing. The premium grew by 7.7% in fiscal year 2024. The penetration has also grown to 3.7%. But the penetration still remains low. The global average is 7%, whereas in India it is at 3.7%. And there are risks also from climate change, from longevity, that is the average lifespan, and cybersecurity concerns also. There are cybersecurity concerns in the financial sector in general, because as per the survey, there are threats, specifically rising cyber attacks on the financial institutions, and the financial losses that they suffered due to cyber incidents can be about $2.5 billion in 2024. But there are certain positives as well. For example, the RBI's cybersecurity framework, it is now aligned with the global standards, and India is ranked tier 1 in the Global Cybersecurity Index 2024. Now, what are the emerging trends in the financial sector? One, the consumer credit share has been increasing in the overall bank credit. The non-bank financing has also been increasing. For example, the companies, they have been raising money through IPOs, the initial public offers. The equity-based financing has also been increasing apart from the loans that they take from the banks. For example, the IPOs, they have increased six-fold from fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 2024. And India's share in the global IPOs has reached to 30% in 2024. The demat accounts, which are used by the investors to invest in the stock markets, they have also risen to 18.5 crores in December 2024. And it poses regulatory challenges also. For example, we need to balance the growth and stability, because There is a rising consumer debt and simultaneously unsecured lending also, which is given to the retail sector. Now coming to the article, it observes that the household savings are being transferred to the stock markets. There is an increasing activism by the retail investors at the Dalal Street, that is the stock market, and there will be an impact of this financialization. The financial markets may end up dominating the policy making by the government. They may end up dominating the regulations which are made by the government, and it may affect the macroeconomic outcomes. In the advanced economies, there has been an unprecedented debt. Both the public and private sector debt has been high, and the economic growth is reliant upon the rising asset prices. This will further increase inequality if they are not sustainable. The financial market growth, for that to be in line with the economy's capital needs, we need to check such uncontrolled financialization also. We need to work alongside the banking sector to meet the capital requirements. The capital that the companies are taking from the equity-based financing, they should get some capital from the banks also. The banks need to adapt to the digital economy and the new age households as well. And they need to maintain their core credit creation functions as well. Now, the next article is related to the artificial intelligence and labor. As the survey claims that the impact of artificial intelligence on the workforce will not be much if we are able to skill our workforce. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy. Now, there are certain concerns, certain fears regarding the adoption of artificial intelligence and its impact on the jobs. One, it might lead to the displacement of the workers, the loss of jobs, because the previous industrial revolutions, they also led to the laying off of the workers. We have that experience. And the artificial intelligence is anyway expected to outperform the humans also in the decision making. And naturally, it will be employed then to do those jobs which humans are doing right now, leading to unemployment. And there is another concern that the benefits that the AI will give, it will be concentrated. Only the few large companies who are engaged in the development of the artificial intelligence, they will be reaping the benefits. It will be like the winner takes all, and it will exacerbate the existing inequality because the profits, they will go in the hands of a few large companies. There is an element of uncertainty and risk also, because the pace at which the artificial intelligence is being developed and deployed, this is more than the pace of the updation of the regulatory frameworks. Therefore, they may be able to bypass the regulatory frameworks and even resort to unethical measures, again leading to uncertainty and risk. But there are certain barriers also to the adoption of the artificial intelligence. The barriers include that the reliability is still questionable because some AI models, they are still giving biased outputs and the human beings need to check their outputs once again. There is a deficit in the infrastructure also. In India, there are not many data centers. There is a deficiency in the computational resources as well. For example, the lack of indigenous graphic processing units, GPUs. And the resource efficiency is also poor because the AI tasks, they consume a lot of energy as well. Plus, the large language models, they have not been indigenous. Now only there will be an initiative to promote the development of large language models in India. Now, what are the suggestions by the economic survey? It says that we need to balance innovation and equity. We need to ensure that the benefits derived from the adoption of newer technology, the adoption of artificial intelligence should be equitable. And we need to build the institutions to regulate the same. We need a tripartite collaboration. The collaboration between the government, the private sector, as well as the academia for the equitable benefit sharing from the usage of AI. We need a proactive policy making from the side of the government also, and a long-term vision whereby we will invest in education, skilling of the workforce so that they can utilize AI and the social infrastructure as well. Now coming to the article, it suggests that there are certain challenges in the AI adoption. The R&D in the AI, it is done by few large companies. Thereby, there are high entry barriers which are created, and the risk of automation benefits being concentrated in the hands of a few. The previous technological advancements also led to the job losses. For example, the Engels post, which is nothing but the job loss due to the advent of a new technology, and after that a prolonged period of unemployment before they are re-employed after reskilling, etc. And it will be particularly undesirable, this Engels pose, in the context of a service-led economy like India. So therefore we need to create jobs, and we need more than 78 lakh non-farm jobs annually by 2030. And there is a potential for the human AI teams also in the scientific research, so that the humans are also employed. The public sector needs to take the responsibility for course correction and vigilance. The next article is related to tigers in India. This is important in GS3 under the topic conservation and environment. India is home to 70% of world's wild tiger population. When we look at the data in 2006, there were about 1400 tigers in India. In 2010, there were about 1700 tigers. In 2018, the number was close to 3000. In 2024, there are about 2226 tigers in India. So the tiger population has been up by about 30% over the past 2 decades. So what are the factors behind the recovery of the tigers in India? We have achieved a successful balance of the scientific strategies and the land sharing practices or the land sparing practices. Land sharing means that humans and tigers, they are coexisting in that area. Land sparing means we have designated an area as exclusively reserved for tigers, the protected area. 85% of the breeding tiger populations have sustained in the protected areas. And we have built corridors also and implemented sustainable land use practices which have enabled the tigers to disperse into the multi-use forests. Plus we have the statutory frameworks, that is Wildlife Protection Act, Forest Conservation Act. We also have the National Tiger Conservation Authority. There are economic and cultural factors also. That is, the regions with lower dependence on the forest resources and the regions which are having better socio-economic conditions, there the recolonization rates of the tigers are higher. And the areas where there is poverty and armed conflict, for example, the Naxal affected regions, there the tiger populations have declined. So the challenge remains that we have about 1,57,000 square kilometer of potential tiger habitat which remains uninhabited, and there are the reasons of socio-political instability and habitat degradation for the no tiger population in that area. Thank you.